Mike, I've never called for lava to rain down from the heavens, but maybe upon Washington, D.C. Would you be that sweet red hot lava for us?
I've never been called sweet, and you call me Sweet Ginger. So I think I'm in, Ben. During my 3-week reign of terror as Trump acting attorney general, before I get chased out of town with my Trump pardon, I will rain hell on Washington, D.C. We've talked about this, Ben. I have 5 lists ready to go, and they're growing. List number 1, we're going to fire. We're going to fire a lot of people in the executive branch and the deep state. Number 2, we're going to indict. We're going to indict Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and James Biden and every other scumball, sleazeball Biden, except for the 5-year-old granddaughter who they refused to acknowledge for 5 years until the political pressure got to Joe Biden. Number 3, we're going to deport. We're going to deport a lot of people, 10 million people and growing, anchor babies, their parents, their grandparents. We're going to put kids in cages. It's going to be glorious. We're going to detain a lot of people in the D.C. Gulag and Gitmo. And list number 5, I'm going to recommend a lot of pardons. Every January 6th defendant is going to get a pardon, especially my hero, Horn Man. He is definitely at the top of the pardon list.
We actually went out and have some upcoming content with Jacob Chansley. We did a podcast interview with him. Went out into the desert. We wanted to learn about shamanism, so we went out into the desert with him. We'll be releasing that video pretty soon, actually, and I think you'll like it quite a bit, Mike.
Our opening clip was American traitor and paid Russian shill Benny Johnson on his show interviewing gleeful fascist Mike Davis, a former clerk for illegitimate Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, nominated to the court by longtime Russian asset Donald Trump, who broke the law in several different ways to come to power in 2016, including with the Kremlin's help. And the DOJ, the U.S. Treasury, the FBI has announced in the press, in press conferences, in published indictments, that they are finally doing something about stopping the Russians from helping Trump win a second time. You heard in that clip what Benny Johnson and countless others in the West are paid to do: promote the political violence they need to turn America into a dictatorship aligned with Russia against the democratic world. This is a 5-alarm fire that's been going on for decades. Recent Gaslit Nation guest Craig Unger documents the Russians developing Trump into a Russian asset since the 1980s in his books House of Trump, House of Putin, and American Compromise. One of Craig Unger's researchers, the renowned Russian mafia expert Olga Lotman, co-host of The Kremlin File, joins me in this discussion. If you want to hear the full bonus show, make sure you are subscribed at patreon.com/gaslit. Welcome to Gaslit Nation. I am your host, Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller Mr. Jones about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine, which they were able to get away with mass murdering millions thanks to bought off Russian disinformation agents in the West. And that is a history that is repeating today. The DOJ, the FBI, and the U.S. Treasury are finally doing what they should have been doing years ago. They're dropping indictments, they're raiding homes of Russian agents, exposing sweeping Russian disinformation networks and Russian cyber warfare units, all determined to steal the 2024 election for Donald Trump, which makes Trump's 3 Supreme Court justices installed to help usher in a right-wing dictatorship and legal warfare against our country's quality of life and progress illegitimate. There's been a lot of breaking news this past week, vindicating yet again what Gaslit Nation has been ringing the alarm about since the very start of the show, and that is, if it sounds like a paid Russian shill, it's a paid Russian shill. Russian-backed MAGA successfully took over the Republican Party thanks to a flood of Russian dark money, disinformation influence operations like buying off Tim Pool and Benny Johnson, who are both complicit in the brutal genocide of Ukrainians, which includes war crimes like the videos that are coming out of drone footage of Ukrainian soldiers surrendering peacefully to the Russians and yet being slaughtered by Russians because it's a genocide. It's a genocide. It's not just an invasion, it's a genocide. They're trying to erase the very existence of Ukraine. just like they did to Chechnya and Chechens, and then absorb whoever's left to be their paid shills. And once they're done with Ukraine, they're going to move on to Poland. They're going to move on to the Baltic states. Why? Because this is Russian imperial history. They don't do much over there except for rape and pillage and just absorb other countries and appropriate their culture as their own and force their language and the cage bars of Russian dictatorship on them. If you don't believe me, watch my film, Mr. Jones. Read the book that I wrote, The Dictatorship. It's easier than it seems. There's a lot of sections there dedicated to the long, brutal history of Russian genocidal imperialism. And it's not just Europe that's suffering. Russia's doing the same across Africa. And so many on the left who claim to be pro-peace, anti-genocide, are silent about that. All right, everyone, to listen to this full episode, be sure to subscribe at the Truth Teller level or higher on Patreon to get bonus shows, all shows ad-free, invites to exclusive events, and more on Patreon/Gaslit. Annual discounts are available. Thank you to everyone who supports our independent journalism against the deep pockets of the Kremlin and their paid Western disinformation agents like Tim Pool, who raked in hundreds of thousands of dollars pushing Kremlin propaganda. He knew where that money was coming from. He's claiming he did not. When you are a squawking parrot repeating the same talking points as the Kremlin, you know who is putting hundreds of thousands of dollars in your bank account. Tim Pool has blood on his hands. Every single person that amplified Tim Pool has blood on their hands. The children, the orphanage, the hospital, the school, and that's just in the last week alone, that have been bombed by Russia. That is because of disinformation agents like Tim Pool normalizing that, excusing that, and blaming the victim. Here is a clip of Tim Pool producing knowingly, again, you do not get hundreds of thousands of dollars and sound like a squawking Russian parrot and not know where your money's coming from. Here is Tim Pool knowingly pushing anti-Ukraine, pro-Russian genocidal talking points. And he was one of the fiercest attack dogs for the Kremlin. Here's a clip of him now. And after we play this clip, there's going to be a full episode with Russian mafia expert Olga Lotman breaking it all down with me for this historic event of the West finally showing up and fighting back. It's a little too late. So many people have suffered in the years of their absence, and they need to do more. They need to allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles that we send them to hit military targets inside Russia that are being used to slaughter civilians. They need to freeze more oligarch assets. They need to close up the loopholes that the Kremlin takes advantage of. We're going to go more into what the West needs to be doing with an upcoming live taping with an investigative journalist who wrote a great book called Punishing Putin. Look to the show notes for that event and how you can gain access. And I'll remind everyone, again, this coming Tuesday is the debate where one of the most qualified people to ever run for president, including when it comes to foreign policy, has to share a debate stage with a convicted felon. We're having a debate watch party that night in the Victory Chat on Patreon. That is where I will be on September 10th, debate night at 9 p.m. Eastern it starts. We will hold hands together and get through that together. And so come join me in the Victory Chat on Patreon. To sign up, look to the show notes for details on that. And just one final programming note, I was going to include a continuation of my interview with the great Michael Podhorzer, but because of all the big breaking news this week, we're going to save that discussion for another time. I look forward to bringing that to you soon. He shares a lot of insights on ways to secure this election that will be running very soon. And now here is paid Kremlin propagandist Tim Pool.
This is psychotic. Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine. They are expanding this war. Now, don't get me wrong. I know you've got criminal elements of the U.S. government pushing them and guiding them and telling them what to do. Ukraine is now accused, a German warrant issued for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, triggering this conflict. Ukraine is the greatest threat to this nation and to the world. We should rescind all funding and financing, pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia.
First of all, thank you so much, Olga, for joining me for this conversation. You and I have been extremely early warning everyone about Russia's attack on our democracy here at home and all the paid useful idiots that they are employing lavishly. This is a long history. When I was reading through this DOJ indictment about how Russian officials want to wine and dine all these Westerners, I kept seeing flashes of the big Moscow party orgy scene in my film, Mr. Jones. And I'm like, this is so on the nose. It's happening all over again. And I want people to know, as fun it is to see these MAGA fascists get called out, like Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, genocides begin with disinformation, and criminals, terrorists get away with genocide because of disinformation. So this is all a story of these rich Westerners with blood on their hands. And there's a long list of people. We're going to go over some of them today. And just to give people a quick overview, we are talking about something the Kremlin calls Project Good Old USA. It is a active measures campaign to use Westerners, pay off Westerners to promote this disinformation, to end support for Ukraine, make the opposition to the Kremlin, like the Democrats and democracy itself, look bad, and elect Donald Trump. Those are the three goals of Project Good Old USA. The DOJ indictment reveals that the Russian disinformation campaign involves 2,800 influencers, 600 of whom are American, including several elected U.S. officials. And it's easy to know who those officials are. Just look at who voted against Ukraine aid and held it up for 6 critical months in Congress. One Russian official is quoted as saying, "We need influencers, a lot of them, and everywhere. We are ready to wine and dine them." The Kremlin talking points revealed in the DOJ indictment directly mirror those used by Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance. That's a running mate picked with the help of Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, and openly endorsed by the Kremlin, namely Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. What are those talking points? Promoting this idea of the end of the American dream, great white replacement theory, that non-white people and quote-unquote perverts and the disabled get all the privileges. Who might they mean by perverts? Hairy hippie feminists, the big gay trans Illuminati agenda, things like that. Overspending on foreign policy at the expense of white America, and America being dragged into war where Americans will be forced to die in Ukraine. This whole operation targeted American gamers, Reddit users, and image board participants, such as those on 4chan. And that is all the backbone of the right-wing strategy used by Trump to drive out the vote and build supporters. The connection between RT and Russian intelligence that was driving this operation has been made repeatedly clear. U.S. officials revealed that the operation was financed by the Kremlin and organized by an RT employee who is also a member of a Russian intelligence service. I'm going to just finish up here, and then I'm going to kick it to Olga. 2 RT employees have been indicted for covertly funding and directing a U.S. company that published thousands of videos to advance Russian interests. One of the U.S. company founders named in the DOJ indictment is Lauren Chen, who recently visited Budapest. So there's also a clear autocratic alliance here between Russia and Hungary, paying and promoting America MAGA propagandists to divide Americans against each other and normalize political violence to overthrow our democracy and establish a Russian-style dictatorship under Donald Trump. The DOJ indictment alleges that RT employees covertly funded and directed a U.S. company with $10 million to promote pro-Russia content through this company called Tenet, based in Tennessee and owned by a shell company out in Canada. Tenet was founded in 2022 by Lauren Chen and Liam Donovan, who serves as president and is implicated in the indictment. Chen was a contributor to Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA and also wrote opinion pieces for RT. And the MAGA commentators they had on their payroll for hundreds of thousands of dollars a month include Benny Johnson, who has 2.7 million followers on Twitter, Libertarian Dave Rubin, who has 2.4 million subscribers, and Tim Pool, who has 1.37 million. Lauren Southern is also included. She visited Russia in 2018 and met with Alexander Dugin. And according to internet sleuths who are digging into these indictments, likely Matt Christensen was also listed here anonymously as well. Again, these people were raking it in. I'm going to read here from the Washington Post. In December 2022, according to the indictment, Tenet's Russian investors tasked the site's founders with hiring a personality that could serve as a face of the channel and routed the funds for it through far-flung destinations such as Mauritius and the United Arab Emirates. Much of that money went to Rubin and Poole, according to the indictment. Rubin received $400,000 a month for 16 videos, plus a performance bonus and a $100,000 signing bonus, all for a series in which Rubin commented on dumb internet clips that often received just roughly 1,000 views per episode. Tenet also proved lucrative for Poole, who made $100,000 per episode for a weekly show he hosted, according to prosecutors. The same month that Tenet launched, Poole purchased a skate park in Martinsburg, West Virginia, as well as other significant real estate purchases in the same area. And Tim Poole was one of the most vicious Kremlin propagandists against Ukraine, calling Ukraine America's enemy. And so it seems that the skate park that he bought should be seized by the feds. What is your take on all of this, Olga Lotman?
Thank you for having me on, first of all.
Well, I didn't want to go through this without you. I was like, Olga, I got you right on the phone. I'm like, you need to saddle up.
Well, my take is we are about a decade overdue on this. Better late than never. And honestly, the FBI did an amazing investigation in showing, methodically how this scheme was played out. Now, just to rewind, RT, Sputnik, and pretty much every single state media outlet is an arm of Russia's intelligence services. They use it for two purposes. One, domestic, to control the narrative domestically and, to feed the domestic propaganda to Russians. And then they have their, global arm, which basically is to push Russia's foreign policy and narratives and everything across Latin America and Europe and the US and Canada and frankly around the whole globe. So this is Russian intelligence services, and these people took money from Russia's intelligence services. Now, this is absolutely nothing new because Russia zoned in on our elections for the 2016 elections around 2008. After they saw Obama won and they saw, took advantage of how much racism was directed towards him, people burning effigies, the far right basically bugging out that there was the first U.S. American, Black president. So Russia took notice of that. And this is when they started preparing for the 2016 election. So what did we see over the past since 2008 to 2016. Russia brought in members of NRA to Moscow, wined and dined them, same thing. Think tank members, far-right members, politicians, evangelical leaders. I mean, this is what Russia has been doing. I mean, the NRA basically was a foreign agent for Russia, laundering their money to put into the 2016 election. So this, all goes back. I mean, it's an old KGB tactic, much easier right now to do. The Soviet Union did this, but now it's just easier to do because you have bigger reach with social media. And you name the amount of followers they have, they can sit there and spew Kremlin garbage propaganda and reach tens of millions of people versus when the KGB would, use a idiot in the US to plant like some kind of propaganda into like a local newspaper. So none of this is new. I'm very happy that, the US has finally woken up because this is all very damaging.